What's up, everybody? I'm excited because I am here today with Tom Frampton. He is the man behind Mastering the Mix, and we are here to cover one of his many exciting plugins that solve some of the wicked problems we encounter as engineers when we're creating music or trying to make that music sound as good as possible. And I've been using his plugins for a lot of years, and we've become mates over time. And I really wanted to have him on the channel here so that you could hear directly from the source what this plugin RESO is all about. So Tom is going to walk us through the background of the plugin. He's going to show us some really interesting use cases that show why he created it, what else is on the market, the gaps that were on the market, which inspired him to create this tool, and what it does differently. So Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Drew, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure, as always.
Right on. So let's start off with a mix that has some problems in it. And you can just show us a quick, hey, here's it without RESO, here's it with RESO, just to familiarize people with the sound and what it's doing. So you can flip over to screen share and walk us through that example.
So here we have a rather fatiguing and horrible resonant mix. And I'm going to play this for you now. So it sounds, you can hear there's a few frequencies that seem to be poking out in a really sharp and horrible way. So I'm going to load up RESO, and we'll immediately be able to see these poking through in the frequency display. So we can see that we've got one here, maybe a couple of little ones poking out through here. So in a nutshell, what is RESO? RESO wants to identify those kind of pointy, horrible frequencies that stick out in your mix, and we're going to try and tame them so that they can't poke through in an unnatural way. And this alleviates the mix from this nasty, fatiguing sound. So shall I go through and see if I can kill some of these resonances? The best way to do this, you can either click the button here. This is like a search and destroy feature. So you can either click this, or you can click Control and sweep your mouse around, and that will just add a little tiny boost that's going to lift out some of the resonances so you can hear those frequencies that are kind of poking through. But now, I'm sweeping around the frequency. What's sticking out? That one's pretty horrible. This one is definitely horrible. Bring that down as well. So I'm double clicking to create these nodes, and the position relative to this peak scale here is the threshold. What does that mean? It means that no audio will surpass the node. And you can see at the top of the line there, you have a Q of 24. The Q is automatically optimized for the frequency. And as we go higher up the frequencies, the Q is going to increase. So here we have a Q of 36 at the top there, then 34, 30, 24. If I created one here and moved it around, you can see the Q is automatically optimizing itself for the frequency. And that just means that it's going to be nice and transparent, but you can adjust it if you wish. You just scroll and you can adjust that Q if needed.
Nice.
So let's have a listen. So I can also, if I found the right frequency, I can hit Control, and that's going to lock the frequency in, so I can move my mouse up and down and set the right level of threshold. So now let's have a listen at these that I've kind of knocked out. We're going to have a listen to the delta, which is the difference, and that's going to show us the audio that's been removed, and we'll do a before and after comparison as well. And that's going to help me dial in the amount of reduction I want. So we're going to set the threshold at the right level. So this is the audio that's being reduced. As you can hear, it's kind of quite horrible. It's very dissonant. What you really want to be looking for is, I might stop that for you. What you really want to be looking for is the dissonant frequencies that are poking out of the mix that are irrelevant to the sonic qualities of the track. So it might be resonances that are out of tune with the audio, because you don't want to remove something that's integral to the overall sound of the music. And you also don't want to remove too much as well, because here we only have four. And you'll hear that there's actually a significant difference in the sound. So I'll do a before and after test now. With without. Resonances are a weird phenomenon where there can be things that you can kind of miss in the mix. You almost don't notice them until they're gone. Now, when you do the before and after tests, it's like night and day. It's really it takes away those horrible fatiguing sounds, and it just makes if you've got a 3-minute song, it's way more pleasurable to listen to without these issues.
Mm-hmm. So if that difference is significant for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, we can dive into a few more of the kind of intricacies of how to set this up. But yeah, very quickly to set this up, search and destroy, double click to create the nodes. The level equals the threshold, and then listen to the delta. Make sure it's sounding horrible, and then the bypass and make sure it's sounding much better.
Awesome, Tom. Yeah, great. Thanks for that quick introduction. Yeah, the RESO in a nutshell. And I know any plugin like this takes months and in some cases years of development. So being able to explain something succinctly like that with a powerful example is good. So yeah, this a bit of the background and story of RESO. So I know with Mastering the Mix, one of your vision with the company is your background is as a mix and mastering engineer, and so you're seeing music come in from people all the time. And what was really neat about your backstory is, rather than just trying to get heavy-handed with mastering, which a lot of engineers would do just to get the job done, you've been instrumental in actually giving the producer or the engineer some feedback to help them to improve. And you have this education focus, and then you've taken that education focus and you've said, hey, let's make a software development company that actually builds tools that help people to easily implement some of these things that can be difficult using other tools. And so you've tried to really smooth that process and empower people with technology that helps them get their mixes further along. And that's really cool. And so this is another plugin in that series. So when you decided, hey, I want to create this next new plugin, what was going on in your mind at that point? What were you seeing or not seeing that necessitated you to want to create this plugin?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you say, I was just working on a lot of masters. It was the mastering that I was doing, the individual, like we just did there. Taking one stereo file and going, how can I solve these difficult problems? Because that's a difficult problem when you think about it. It's a resonance that's sticking out and it's uncomfortable to listen to. How do you fix it? And this was actually, this was prior to dynamic EQs getting as much, place in the market as they do now, as they have now. So, and then I remember when Pro Q3 came about, and I was like, wow, if I look around, I can see that if I notch out a very thin Q and I bring the dynamic range right down, I can make these mixes sound really clean and really nice. And so I ended up doing that a lot in my work. And I found that my clients would come back to me saying, oh my goodness, this sounds amazing. That's one of the, I think as a mixing and mastering engineer, one of the advice I would give to anyone is really try to wow your customers. Try to be like, when they hear it, they can't believe the difference. And that's what's going to keep them coming back for more. And this was a process that I was doing where I was really wowing my customers with, they just couldn't believe that what had happened to their song when like you saw in that example, the before and after can be so significant, such a vast improvement, that I was like, okay, I'm now obsessed with this process. I'm going to do it all the time. But then I found using the dynamic EQs was quite cumbersome in terms of the process. So I was like, by this point, we'd already released a few plugins. I was like, let's create something that just does this one thing really, really, really well. We want to search and destroy individual horrible little frequencies that come out. Maybe it's a whistle, maybe it's a synth like resonance, maybe it's something nasally with the vocal. It also works really well as a de-esser, and that can also be extrapolated into other things like hi-hats and whatever. So I was like, let's make it do one thing really, really, really well. So that's where my head was at. And so we just made it as simple as we possibly could and said, let's just look at this one process and make it as straightforward as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, and very similar to you, I've found the same things. I was using these tools that can do it, and dynamic EQ is just such a game changer. Like when dynamic EQ came out, and FabFilter's approach is amazing. It's a tool I use every single day on every song, and it's a workhorse. But sometimes it's not the right tool for the job, because as an engineer, one of the things that comes down to is how quick can I get through this in my workflow? I have clients that are paying me a good rate to be able to work on their music. And if I can work faster, I can keep their budget lower, and I can do more work for more clients and help more people. And so it's in the spirit of that I'm always looking to what's happening that addresses the workflow. And sometimes it's just having the tool that is really optimized for that workflow. So really love it there.
Yep.
I think one of the biggest questions that comes up for people in terms of resonances, and I know you've covered this in some of your blog posts, and the Mastering the Mix blog is fantastic. I highly recommend everybody to get on it because Tom covers so many different topics and has amazing infographics, and it's just such a useful resource. But I remember seeing some blog posts come out that were kind of addressing this, which is, how do I know it's a bad resonance and that it should be taken out? Because, a lot of times you have acoustic instruments or vocals, and part of the magic of that instrument is that it has resonances. They have harmonics and they have timbre. And so how do you know that you're not taking out something that's good, and how do you identify a good versus a bad resonance?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So that's why we introduced the delta and the bypass features. And this is something that I think is so crucial, not just in, I don't get too sidetracked, but making sure that you're making positive progress with each individual step when you're mixing or mastering a track is so crucial. That's why I'm constantly bypassing. If there's a delta, I'm constantly using it. I want to know exactly the processing that I'm introducing and the effect it's having on the mix. That's why, our plugin Reference, where it allows you to constantly refer back to your mix as you work through your master or to other tracks, and gives you all the tools to do that. I'm obsessed with that. So with regards to kind of some good rules of thumb with RESO, those are the ones that I use. So I had mentioned them before. One was try to avoid bringing out the resonances that are in the key of what you're working on. So as you say, they can be really integral to the overall sound. It doesn't mean that you can't control them a little bit, which is why it's helpful, because you can set the threshold of the node. And what you might want to do is just take the edge off something. That doesn't mean you're removing it. Now, that is one of the benefits of RESO, because when you place a node, you're placing it at the threshold at which no audio is going to go above that. It means you can still have that audio coming through the mix, right? It just doesn't go above that threshold. The difference between that and a dynamic EQ is that the dynamic EQ is more of like perhaps you have the node at 0 decibels and you have a little ducking going on at, like, let's say -6, and it might be relative to a bit of a threshold. Sometimes that threshold is often that threshold is automatic, so you don't get to there's a lot more reduction than might be intentional. So I find that this approach with RESO makes it much more intentional of how much you actually want to take out of the mix. And the other thing that you pointed to as well is, taking out too much stuff. So again, in that example that I showed you, I had 4 nodes and it made a big difference to the sound. Again, with all these audio rules, they can be broken. Of course they can, depending on what's going on. But generally speaking, between 4 and let's say a maximum of 8 nodes in RESO, it can be different with different products because they do it in different ways. And again, it also depends on how much reduction you're doing. But you don't want to, that as long as you're bypassing and you're not hearing a hollow sound, and you can kind of keep a fresh mind with that by using reference tracks and making sure you're not, notching out too much of the mix. As long as you're kind of on track and you keep using the bypass and keep using the delta, that should stop you from taking out too much and potentially destroying the sound.
Excellent. Yeah, great. And I know that's a big one that I've encountered as I've been going through. I'm like, okay, should I, I'm hearing, and sometimes hearing and seeing, because you're always using analyzers and stuff, right? These summing peaks and frequencies that are kind of, are they jumping out? And I think you can never get past the old advice of use your ears. And because you can't always trust your ears when you're listening to a song over and over again, you have to have a frame of reference. And so you have to be A-Bing this with the plugin on and off, and you have to be A-Bing this against a mix or mixes or masters that you really like and you think sound balanced, right? So that process of comparison, it's so easy as an engineer to get lost in the rabbit hole of, I was just telling Tom actually earlier today that I spent about 5 hours, 6 hours mixing a song for a deadline for a client yesterday. And, after that length of time, you've just lost perspective, right? So I was heavily using reference tracks through the entire process to get my ears back on track, because the human brain and ear system is quite capable of making comparisons, even when it's kind of lost. Even if you're in a long mixing session, or if you don't really know, if you're not trusting yourself as an engineer, you can really hear the comparison between something that's good and something that's bad if you listen to them back to back.
100%. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, Tom has a few really neat use cases, all spooled up. So why don't we get into those? And I think in these different examples of where to use it, what to use it on, because it's not just for the master, it can be used on individual tracks or instruments, and it can be used on submixes or groups. So it's quite flexible in how you can use it. And as we dig into these, maybe Tom, what we can do is get into what are some of the other approaches or other tools that you've used, and how do they sound compared to RESO?
Okay, so here we have a really cool rock track. Now, it could be tricky to hear, but in the context of the mix, the vocals have rather a nasty resonance. So let's hear it in the context, and I'll solo, and you might hear that it comes more obvious to the ear. So if I'm going through a mix like this, I would go, okay, I want to try and solve the problem, the biggest problem that's sticking out to me at the time. So to me, that vocal is just sounding horrible. So it's not awful, it's just got a resonance. So I jump into RESO, and as I mentioned before, we'll do that same kind of search and destroy. So okay. Out there. So these, to me, seem to be the two horrible frequencies. I can find that out. It's a good way of doing it is listening to the delta and going, was that what I was hearing? So I think so. Those are the kind of horrible frequencies that I was hearing. So there's a couple of approaches here. One is we keep the cue as it is. Very, very, by default, the cue is very transparent. So what I can do is I could lower the threshold here and even go for a thinner cue, and I'd be notching out just a tiny bit and it feels very transparent. That's one approach. Or I can, and I'll A/B these so we can test them. So we'll start with that. So I'm going to bring it down. Notice how if I have the cue at 5 there, it's too much. That's an example of notching out too much and being too destructive with the audio. However, at a cue of 40, you might find that it's not enough to capture the issue at hand. So it's finding that right balance. So there's one approach at solving the problem. Let's go to another instance there, and I'll do the same. Where were they? 1884, 421. So something like that, 1884. And
yeah, it's nice having the A/B too, so that you can you can flip back and forth. That's such an essential feature to have on plugins. When you're, I find I use the A/B when I'm feeling a bit of like indecision. I'm like, is this move the right move, or is another setting
which will work?
Yeah, exactly. which will work better. And like I said earlier, the human ear is really good at comparisons when you can flip back and forth between them quickly. And so this is a really essential feature.
So what I'll do now is I'm going to try putting the nodes much higher. So we're taking out less of the mix, but I'm going to broaden the cue, and we're going to hear how that sounds different. So notice what I'm doing here. This is the real-time frequency display, and then the white line is like the max, and you can reset that if you want to. And you can see that's where it's pushed up to the very top. Those are the max settings. What I'll do is I'll bring this cue to, let's say, 10, and this one may be a bit more, like 15, 16. Did you see how the delta reduction line gets a lot fatter? And you can also see there's a before and after frequency display here. You can kind of see the differences coming out. So you want to have this nice and subtle. There's still quite a lot of reduction going on. I'll just bring this up again, and we can do some A/B testing and deltering. A lot more audio is being reduced there. What is done is done. I swear you'll be the death of me, the death of me, the death of me. If I become... So when I A/B these two examples, I'm hoping that you guys can hear it here. It's probably a bit easier to hear it through headphones, but what I'm getting, and maybe Drew, you can let me know your thoughts here. With the A setting, we're going for a nice thin cue, very transparent. It allows more of the vocal to come through and shine, and it just fixes the problems that need to be fixed without touching other parts of the signal. Whereas with the B setting, where you've got the nodes quite high up in terms of the threshold, so it's capturing less of the audio, but with the wider cue, it's pulling out more of the vocal sound, and it's making it sound a bit odd, a bit thin, a bit filtered. And I personally go for the approach with on the A side. Maybe I can just A/B those one more time for you guys. So now that you've heard my description, you can pay attention to that feature. We're listening for a more well-rounded sound in A and a slightly stranger filtered sound in B. If I become what is done is done, and I'll never be okay. I swear you'll be the death of me, the death of me, the death of me. So what I find there is they both solve the problem in different ways. However, it comes down to the resonance itself. There might be a use case where you have where you do want to increase the cue to capture all of the horrible resonance just based on the sonic quality of the resonance itself. But it's just worth being aware when you do have to broaden the cue. If you bring up the threshold, you'll probably get better results.
Brilliant, Tom. Great example. And yeah, in terms of what I was hearing there, I prefer the more surgical approach. And the human ear is not super sensitive to very narrow cue changes. It's the same thing with room acoustics in music studios. You can have a huge null, but if it's really thin, if it's a thin cue null in your room, a lot of times the human ear either doesn't really hear it in the first place or it adapts around it quite quickly. So I find that the wider cue approaches tend to be a bit more heavy-handed, and they end up making the vocal feel like it's missing something. And I think that is an important distinction. The other thing that I'm really hearing there is, man, can you ever hear the resonances after you've been listening to it without them for a bit, and then you bypass the plugin? It's like, oh, how did I not hear that in the first place? It seems so obvious. That I think there's also going to be some ear training here. And ear training, I'm always an advocate of ear training. How do you ear train? I think the best way to ear train is on the job. You know, like you're getting in there and you're A/Bing, you're dialing things in, and you're making those bypass judgments of like, okay, yeah, I can hear that in the mix now as something that sounds a bit offensive, and then I'm taking it out and it sounds better, and you do that by A/Bing and experimentation like this. So So excellent. And it's such a pleasure, man, to see you, the creator of this plugin, putting it through its paces, because I've been using this plugin for months now, and I'm seeing things that you do in it that I haven't been doing, that I'm like, okay, I could be working faster. And there's a couple features that I haven't been using, as is the case whenever you take on a new tool. There's always pieces of it. And this is why I'm such an advocate for learning your tools at a deep level. And this is one of the motivations for me to have Tom on the show today. So yeah, thanks, man. Great to see you working.
Cool. Thank you very much. That's yeah, great. I think what you said about ear training is really key. And I would also add to that I can't stress enough that the delta and the bypass and the sweep, these three features, doesn't matter how much ear training you've done, these three things are going to be this is what's going to really help you to find those and make those advancements very quickly. And I know that Drew is a big advocate of this. It's being honest with yourself, and it helps when the plugins are honest with you as well. So this is just being super honest with you. It's a bypass. This is what's going on. It enables you to hear what you're doing. And yeah, I hope that it does have that kind of ear training aspect to it as well.
Awesome, Tom. Great.
Cool. We have a couple of other. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Yeah, okay, cool. We have a couple of other examples as well. So we have the first mix we worked on was really kind of crazy, but we have a bit more of a subtle master here. And so let's have a little listen to this. And I want to show you another feature of RESO, which is the automatic resonance targets. The kind of it has a feature that can find the issues within your mix. So let's have a listen. I'm going to bring RESO up. Let's listen to this one. So what RESO's done there is it's suggested nodes and the locations of those nodes. So you can see them kind of lining up with this one here. There's a couple of little resonances here. There's one there. This one kind of pokes out as well. So you have a choice here. You can either engage all the targets, or you can pick the ones that you want to engage, and you can basically hear how that sounds. So let's see what RESO has found there. So it's found, that's what it's removing, before and after. So it's certainly better, but I think that you can also then use the search and destroy to zone in on anything else you think needs to be removed. And you can tweak these as well, because, you've got, although each one has their own individual cue, which is optimized based on the frequency, you might want to jump in and say, I want to change them. Or you might say, I don't want any of these. I don't want any of these ones that were added. I'm going to delete them all. I want to focus on the main issues that arose. So I can select a few, but I want to keep this one, but I want to bring this down. I want to just keep that one there, and maybe I'm going to add this one here. So maybe have a combination of the targets and your own. So again, there's just 3 resonances here to remove, but you can hear the difference, and it's sounding really nice. It's a nice combination of the targets. You can just do the kind of, I always encourage people, use the stuff that helps you get the quick results, but tweak it yourself, because you're always going to get slightly better results. There are no tools that go, this is the perfect setting. So they're targets. We didn't call it like the immediate fix. So these are things that you can, they are statistically the correct nodes to remove based on all of our research and machine learning and the rest of it. However, nothing beats what you're listening to, what feels right, what's right for the song. So yeah, a combination is what we'll recommend.
Yeah, and I like that too. Like, you can have there's just some people, some engineers or music producers that are tweakers. I'm one of them. I like the
Yeah.
deep dive. I like getting under the hood. I like the manual control. I like to understand how things work, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. And
But it's also, just to really jump in quickly there, Drew, it's also the reason why you're exceptional at what you do, because
thank you.
these minor details, getting the difference between this node being here and it being here is the difference between, it makes a difference. You make lots of little adjustments like that, and you're going to see exponential improvements. And this is why your mixes are so amazing, because and why your customers keep coming back to you year after year, because you focus on those really intricate details that separate you from from people that are getting their mixes from 95% and you're getting it to 99, 100%. So I can't reiterate that tweakability enough. Of people that really want to go from intermediate to pros, that attention to detail is essential.
Awesome. Yeah, agreed. And on top of that, there are some, like, I love to deep dive on everything, and left to my own devices, I'll spend a lot of time polishing mixes, and I love that process. It's the artistry behind this, and I love doing what I can to make that extra 5% or 10% difference on a piece of music. But there are also a lot of times, as we both know, where you're on a deadline and you have a client and they need a rush job. Sometimes with me, what happens a lot is a client just needs a draft mix. They don't need the final thing, but they're like, hey, I need it at the 90% mark so that I can show it to a client, or that I can play it out at a club, or I can have it at this event. And there's a lot of times when I'm like, okay, I don't have time for the deep dive. I don't have time for all those details. I need something that's going to get me there as quick as possible. And anything that saves me a bit of time by leveraging the calculations that have gone into creating this plugin and the machine learning, like you said, using the engage targets automatic feature is something that I've used quite a bit and found it very useful. So I like the dual approach, hey, I just want the plugin to run these calculations for me and get it as close as it can. And then, okay, I actually have time to get into the details here, and I'm going to fuss with each one of these nodes until I get it really sounding as good as it can get to me.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Great.
Yep.
Shall we take a look at some of the other tools that you have seen that have attempted to solve this same problem, and how they compare and contrast with the approach in RESO?
Sure. Let's do that. So let's have Subtle Master RESO. We can do Subtle Master Pro Q3, and we can do Subtle Master Soothe. There are some others, but these are the ones that I personally use myself and know. I would say these are plugins that I use very often. They're brilliant plugins. I use them all the time. So they're ones that I think I can talk about. So this is how I used to do this process with Pro Q3. I'll be looking at the spectrum here. So what could be? I think maybe there's one. I'd then change the Q. I'd bring that up to, I just for speed, I'd flick it up to 40 and I might bring it back down. And I'd leave this at 0 and I'd lower the dynamic range band. And so I just have a listen to see at what point the reduction was right. You can open up the threshold here and you can change it. So that would be my process for doing it with Pro Q3, looking around. Another thing that some engineers do, which is similar to what we have with RESO, is sweeping around like this. You can do this and you can have a listen. There was one there as well. So yeah.
That's the search and destroy equivalent, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this was my process. And it's fine. And I do use I find the dynamic EQ is more useful for other things personally, because I just find that process a little bit slower. But again, it works. I compared it to It's pretty close. Of course, I'm going to say I think the Reso one is a bit better, but I use Reso for this all the time, so I'm probably better at finding those issues with Reso. But this is, of course, another approach, which is totally reasonable. I don't know if you have any other ways that you do it with Pro Q3.
That's very similar to what I've been doing. Yeah, 100%. And yeah, our intention here in this compare and contrast is not to trash any of these tools, because Tom and I have both said huge respect for what FabFilter's done with this EQ, and we both use this EQ all the time. It's a total workhorse. It's on Workhorse. It's on every project that I do. But sometimes it's not either the fastest, or some cases the best, or the best and fastest tool for the job. And we, a theme in our conversation today has been about workflow and speed of workflow, and what lets you just get on with it. And yeah, this is something that can do it. But Tom and I have both found that it's a little bit time consuming to get this set up, but you can get great results with this as well.
I'm going to humble myself and say one thing that Pro Q3 has done just fantastically well that we are not as good at, and it's their frequency display is just absolutely, it is wonderful. It's so detailed. If you look at being able to see all of these, that's lovely. There's a lot of detail going on here that you won't actually find in pretty much any other plugin. They don't really do it in a similar way. So you can get all of this stuff, which is very helpful.
And you asked me one thing that I do. Some things, the thing that I do is I'll grab one of those little yellow peak nodes and drag it down, and it will create the subtractive nodes a little faster. Yeah.
That's a really good approach, actually. That's a really good approach.
That helps to speed things up a little bit sometimes. But yeah. Great. Okay. Well, let's take a look at Soothe.
So Soothe, here we go. So I personally use Soothe. I use it in, again, all of my work. I use it in tandem with Reso, because I find that I get this question a lot. How is Reso different from Soothe? Soothe, I find, is amazing at being able to tame broad spectrums of frequency. So if I have Soothe on this track here now, we delta it, it's working on quite a broad range here. Now I can change this, and I can make it a bit thinner. I might have to remove some of these. Maybe I'm not quite as fast, but even if I do this, I'm still affecting quite a broad range, and I'm not really zoning on something. I can increase the sharpness, that can help, and I can play with the selectivity. But you see, I'm still affecting quite a broad range here. I don't know if there's anything else I can be doing to make this even less. Do you have any ideas, Drew, of what I can do to really like zone in on a specific area?
No, I think you're doing it. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, it's not a bad thing. This does what it does really, really nicely. If I've got a horrible sounding anything, I'll pop this on, and I find this is, if I'm taming something, I'll often reach for this before I reach for Pro Q3. If I'm taming like low end mud, for example, this is amazing at that. Just like add a little something here, and I can I'll bring down the low end mud, and you can adjust the sharpness and selectivity in the left right. You can go to mid side. That's really, really nice, really helpful. And attack and release, tons of control there. But when it comes to fixing resonances, it's this in this use case, it's broad for me. So look at all this what it's producing, and I often do this. Often a track is overly bright and a bit harsh, and I'll take the overall edge off with Soothe. Soft works great for mastering. So let's just hear how this sounds before and after. So maybe this track doesn't have a particularly harsh, there's not really a harshness going on to kind of really show off the power of Soothe, because it is brilliant.
Right.
But what it's not doing is particularly finding those specific resonances and knocking them out. So I'm trying to find the good sharpness, selectivity. If I bring the selectivity down, it should focus on the things that are poking through the mix even more. So yeah, it says more selectivity focuses on the narrower pick. So maybe I should turn it up. I'm not quite sure which is the best setting for that, so I'm not going to pretend to know. But if I'll jump back and forth between the three of them so you can hear the differences. It's a bit of an unfair test because it's judging them based on what RESO is built to do, and these tools obviously do different things. So that's the kind of, it's just kind of highlighting the separation between them. Both absolutely, some of the best plugins and most versatile plugins that you can grab, but just to highlight the specific difference between how RESO focuses on alleviating resonances versus other tools.
Yeah, great. And I think you made a good point there, which is this is what RESO is designed for. And I really like having the right tool for the job. And it really makes your life a lot easier. And I think another element that I want to touch on here is having fun and being in creative flow. So your tools that you're using and investing into should support you in enjoying the process. So if you are going through the laborious process of working with a tool that makes it more complicated, there's more steps involved, then it's just going to be less enjoyable. And why do I engineer music for a living? Because I love it. I love it. And there's times when I love it more and when I love it less. And the times when I feel like I'm struggling against my tools, like I'm fighting an uphill battle, like the tool is working against me, are the times when I don't feel like I love it as much. And the times when I'm just like, oh, I had this amazing session and everything was kind of flowing and coming together is when I can just be like, flick, 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 flick. And I'm not even thinking about what I'm doing because I know the tool on a deep level. And it's also because the tool has made the workflow really smooth and really quick and really enjoyable. And I think that's a common theme with your plugins, because you're not a software developer. You have software developers that work with you, which is great. And you can play to your strengths, which is you're an engineer and you use these tools. And so you've designed the user interfaces, the feature sets, the workflow in such a way that it's enjoyable for you to work with because you are your customer as well.
100%. Yeah, I think I couldn't have put that better. I think you're so right. It's so being a mixing and mastering engineer, or even just working on your own music, when you're able to problem solve and you do fix the problems and you make that positive progress, and you look back and you're able to bypass or do an A/B test on a previous mix and go, oh, I've smashed it. That feeling is so euphoric, which is why I think so many people are so into making music, because of this kind of like, it is actually, well, when it comes to, there's tons of creativity, but there's also a huge problem solving element to it. It's a game almost. It's a game of like, how do we, it's a game of chess. What moves do I need to make to push this in the right direction, to make something that sounds incredible and will stand the test of time? And like you say, when you have the tools that help you achieve those goals, it just makes you feel so good. And if you can do it quickly as well, then, it's just win-win-win.
100%. Yeah, agree with you there. Great. Thanks for that walkthrough. So where are we at in terms of examples? Is there anything else you want to show us in terms of how you use RESO?
I mean, I can quickly show you one more example. So it can be used on anything that is even like remotely resonant. Okay. If it's a mix, a vocal, a synth. I'll have a quick look at the synth here. Let's see. Let's see what we can find. Oh, something around there. Something going on there. Let's see. much more subtle in this one. So maybe I'll bring the threshold up a little bit. And you can add whatever you want. You know, if you want to just take in a few bits that just take the edge off the sound. Again, play with it. It's something that you have to just experience, listen to. You've seen the process now of kind of my suggested approach. Again, initiating the nodes near. I always suggest just start like initiating the nodes around this area. So basically where the audio is near its loudness. But for example, if these two aren't doing anything at this point, but they need to be around the real-time kind of loudest sections. And then you'll see what the processing is doing up here. So you'll see where the node is actually kicking in and where it's not. So all of these things are designed just to help you, set the right settings. Sometimes it's really subtle. For example, on that one, the resonances were way less than than some of the other examples. What can happen though is you do a little bit of resonant reduction here, a little bit of a resonant reduction there, and then it accumulates into a really nice, clean sounding final mix. It's like compression, rather than doing tons of compression on the master, do a little bit at the stem level, very subtle. What can also happen is if I just wanted to add this one final point, is if I fix all the resonances on the music stem that I think need to be removed, and I do that for each individual channel, be aware that when everything comes together, new resonances can arise. So when you combine the music with the vocals and the effects and the drum tops, things can combine together. Even on an individual level, if there are no resonances, they might combine, and there might be some new ones in the master channel or in the mix bus or however you want to approach it. So the way that I do it when I'm stem mastering a track like this one, I'll go through and I'll listen to see if there's any resonances that I can remove on a more subtle level or more significant level on each channel. And then I'll go, and there could definitely still be some now when they combine together. So then that process of doing it on the mastering as well, it's not like just be aware that that's a possibility.
Understood. Yeah, it's a great point to make. It's summing of things and how things sum up on the master level. And that's why I like the examples where you've shown us how to use it on an individual track. You could most certainly use it on a submix or a group, and then you can use it on the master. There was a question I had for you. One is, in your perspective, where do resonances come from in the first place? And of course, they can come from a lot of different places. But where are some of the most common causes in your mind of kind of these types of problematic resonances in material?
Sure. There are two that are probably the most common. One is poor recording spaces, which is very common. So you'll be in a room that doesn't have acoustic treatment. You'll just be using maybe a microphone or whatever. I mean, if, for example, vocal booths are a thing for a reason. And having that nice deadened sound can really help. But if you don't have that, then when you have all of these reflections coming back at the microphone, they can sum together and you basically get the sound of your room. And then it depends on what the sound of your room is. You get maybe some reverb, maybe some decay and kind of like splash black and all this kind of stuff that just makes the audio less pleasant to listen to. So I say, and that could be recording vocals, recording guitar, recording anything. It could be the microphone that you're using. It could be it could be so many things that kind of are part of that signal chain. So basically, recorded audio is something that is almost definitely going to have some kind of resonance. It comes up all the time. And the other thing is synth patches. So whether it's a bass or whatever, or a lead, often just because of the nature of synthesis, there are, waves combining together in certain ways that are sometimes very unpleasant. that's I guess there's and fatigue, and there's not really another word for it. It's when they combine. It's not always the case, but it's regularly the case. It's often the case that you'll have synths that become harsh, and this can become more obvious when you start boosting the high frequencies. So again, a resonance might be not so much of an issue until you, for example, add a 5 decibel boost, because maybe that particular track needed a 5 decibel boost in the high frequencies, but it brought to light this resonance that now needs to be tamed in that context. So yeah, those are kind of a few of the ways that these resonances can creep into your mix.
100%. Yeah, and fully agreed there. As a avid student of acoustics, I know that any room that has parallel surfaces is going to have standing waves, otherwise known as room modes. And those room modes, when they get excited by frequencies, SPL, that's happening in the room, such as a recording take, then those particular frequencies ring out because of the standing wave that is reflecting back and forth between those two parallel surfaces. It rings out longer. So you have in any room, unless it's like a multi-million-dollar recording studio that has no parallel surfaces and things like that. But most of the rooms that most people are working in these days have parallel surfaces, and to varying degrees, they're untreated or treated mildly. And you have these frequencies corresponding to the room dimensions that will ring out. It's called modal ringing or a resonance. And that gets baked into your recording without you intending for it to be there. So that's a really significant one, and an excellent one to point out. I had one last question, I think, for you. We've gone in a pretty big deep dive here, and I love this form of content. I hope everybody's enjoyed it so far, because I really enjoy getting into the details and understanding the tools at a deep level, because that really empowers us with them. And I have one final question for you, and that's, as I've been using RESO, I was using it on a vocal driven future-based track, and I set it up so that it was addressing some resonances that were happening in the vocal, speaking of recording things in real spaces and where they come from. So it was that exact type of stuff. And then it was dialed in perfectly. But then partway through the performance, the vocalist switches octaves. And so she's singing in falsetto now, and all the resonance is shifted into a different octave range. And so how would you address that? And the way I did it was I just set up a second instance of RESO and tailored it in. And I just wanted to see, is that how you would approach it, or is there a different way of looking at it?
I think that's the smartest way of doing it. It's definitely the quickest. So it happens. It's like, I get this as well in there are so many different circumstances in music production where, something happens just like that, and you have to process something differently. And another example is when you've got someone's done a bass stem for a full mix, and there is a normal bass all the way through the track, and then at some section there's like an 808 section. I'm getting that on a different channel. That needs something else completely. It's a different sound. I'm going to treat it different sonically. Now, the example you gave was much more subtle, obviously just switching octaves. I personally would look at that and I'd say, I'm going to try this and see how it sounds. I'll use these settings. If I decide that there are either new resonances, or that the ones that I already have on there are redundant in the context of this new octave, I would 100% just duplicate. Let's go again. Let's get some new settings. I mean, you could automate switching to the B setting, for example. You could have an A-B thing and you can just switch from A to B. I think probably duplicating the track is faster for me, and a bit less. It probably gives you more flexibility as well in the rest of the mix. So I would go for duplicating the track under those circumstances.
Nice. Great. Oh, that's awesome, Tom. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is kind of something that I really enjoy doing. I love talking to the people who make the tools, and you always learn something new. I wouldn't necessarily call myself an experienced user of RESO. I've been using it for a while, but I don't really call myself experienced with tools until it's been like years. I'm much more of a power user with Pro Q3. Regardless of my skill level with different plugins, though, whenever I talk to the people behind them, and especially other engineers who are using them, and you happen to be both, I always learn something new. So I've learned a bunch of new things about how to use RESO today. I'm feeling even more jazzed and inspired to use it in my music and in my workflow. And yeah, I can't wait until we get to talk about some of the next tools that are coming down the pipeline. So Tom, it's been a real pleasure today, mate. Really enjoyed chatting with you. You're up to some great stuff, and I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us all through this and help us get to know RESO better.
Drew, thank you so much, mate. It's always a pleasure chatting. We've had lots of conversations, and I always learn stuff talking to you. I mean, the way you answered the question about how resonance coming to a vocal recording, you know your stuff. I love it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it comes from, I happen to have spent the last 6 months working with my acoustician on my team building the ultimate dream studio control room. So I've been deeper in the world of acoustics than maybe anyone really ever wants to be for the past little while, but it's been a really rewarding thing, and understanding how sound works is of obvious benefit to us all as engineers. So nice, mate. Well, I know it's evening there in England, and you've got a family to attend to and a very adorable cat to attend to. And I was kind of hoping the cat would make an appearance, but next time maybe.
He's not. Yeah, we'll have to bring him for the.
We'll have to have him do a cameo.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, awesome, Tom. Great, man. Well, thank you so much again, and until next time, we will chat again soon.
Thank you.